The airport was full of noise. People walked fast, pulling their bags and looking at their phones. Flights were being announced, but one woman walked slowly and calmly through the crowd. She wore a black suit, simple but elegant. Her dark skin glowed under the airport lights. Her heels clicked softly on the floor. She looked like someone important, but no one knew who she was. Her name was Ms. Rose Carter. She moved straight to the first-class gate. The airline staff looked at her and gave her a strange look. One young man behind the counter whispered to the other. They both stared at her, thinking she must be lost. But Rose just smiled and handed over her ticket. First class, the woman at the counter asked with doubt. Yes, Rose said calmly. Seat 1A. The woman scanned the ticket. The screen showed everything was correct. But still, the woman looked unsure. You can board now, the woman said, forcing a smile. Rose nodded and walked down the jet bridge. Inside the plane, first class was quiet. Soft music played in the background. Comfortable wide seats lined the area. Rose found seat 1A and sat down. She took out a small book and started reading. She looked peaceful. Then a man walked in. He wore an expensive suit and gold watch. He looked at Rose, then looked at his own ticket again. His face changed. He called the flight attendant. Excuse me, he said. I think this seat is mine. There must be a mistake. She shouldn't be here. The flight attendant came over and looked at Rose. Ma'am, may I see your ticket again? She asked. Rose looked up. Her smile didn't fade. She gave the ticket again. The attendant checked. Everything was correct. Rose had seat 1A, but still, she didn't look satisfied. Okay, the flight attendant said, but her voice was cold. The man shook his head. First class is not for everyone. He muttered loud enough for Rose to hear. Rose said nothing. She opened her book again. Other first-class passengers began arriving. Some of them also looked at Rose with surprise. One woman whispered to her husband, maybe she won some contest or something. Another said, she doesn't look like someone who flies in first class. But Rose stayed calm. She did not argue. She just watched them quietly. The same rude man stood again and walked toward her. Look, he said, I paid good money for this seat. You clearly don't belong here. Maybe it's better if you just move to economy and save yourself the embarrassment. The flight attendant returned. She tried to look polite. Ma'am, would you mind moving to the back until we can sort this out? Rose looked at her. Then, without saying a word, she pulled out her phone and made a call. Everyone nearby watched her. Hi, she said softly on the phone. It's me. I'm on flight 782, seat 1A. I'm being asked to move by the staff. There was silence as she listened to the person on the other side. Yes, she said. Please take care of it. Thank you. She ended the call and looked at the flight attendant. You can wait a few minutes, she said calmly. Things will be clear very soon. The attendant looked confused. Who did she call? Someone whispered. The man in the suit laughed. What did you call your boyfriend? He joked. Rose didn't reply. 3 minutes later, the cabin manager came rushing in. She looked nervous and out of breath. She whispered something in the flight attendant's ear. The attendant's face turned pale. Then the manager looked at Rose and smiled politely. Miss Carter, we apologize for the misunderstanding, she said. Please let us know if you need anything during the flight. The man's smile faded. The other passengers looked shocked. Rose went back to her book. The man sat in silence, now suddenly aware he had made a mistake. Everyone wanted to know. Who was this woman? Why was the airline suddenly afraid of her? And what was in that one phone call that changed everything? No one knew it yet, but that quiet woman in seat 1A was about to teach them a lesson they would never forget. The plane was now in the air, flying smoothly above the clouds, but the air inside the first-class cabin was heavy. People sat quietly, stealing glances at Ms. Rose Carter. She was calm, reading her book again like nothing had happened. But everyone else was thinking the same thing. Who is she? And what just happened? The rude man from earlier looked confused and nervous now. He kept glancing at her, tapping his fingers on the armrest. The flight attendant who had questioned Rose earlier now avoided eye contact. Even the cabin manager stayed close, just in case Rose needed anything. But Rose said nothing. She didn't look angry. She didn't shout. She didn't demand. She just smiled to herself, like someone who had seen this happen before. Because she had. Flashback. 10 years ago. 10 years ago, Rose Carter was just a young woman with big dreams. She lived in a small apartment with her grandmother. Her clothes were secondhand, and some nights they had only bread for dinner. But Rose never complained. She studied hard. She worked part-time jobs. She read books about business, leadership, and strong women who made it despite the odds. Her grandmother used to tell her, "Baby, the world won't always see your light, but that don't mean you stop shining." She remembered those words every time someone looked down on her. In college, Rose faced professors who ignored her questions. In job interviews, people smiled at her but didn't hire her. She heard words like, "You don't fit our company culture," or "We're looking for someone more polished." But Rose kept going. She started a small company from her bedroom. At first, it was just her and her laptop. She sold beauty products online. She handled orders, made deliveries, and replied to customers, all by herself. Slowly, her business grew. People started noticing her hard work. Investors called her. Big stores asked for her products. In just 7 years, Rose built one of the most successful beauty brands in the country. And now, she was one of the top Black female CEOs in the business world. But still, when people saw her, like on this flight, they didn't see a CEO. They just saw a Black woman who looked out of place. Back in the plane, the rude man suddenly spoke again, trying to break the silence. "So, you must be someone important," he said with a forced laugh. Rose didn't look at him. "I'm just a woman on her way to a business meeting," she said. "Right," he said, smiling awkwardly. "It's just, first class is usually for, certain types of travelers." Rose closed her book and looked at him for the first time. "Tell me," she said softly, "what type of traveler do you think I am?" The man went quiet. He looked around, hoping someone would interrupt. But no one did. Rose smiled again. "Don't worry. You don't have to answer. The airline already did." The man turned red and looked away. Meanwhile, back near the cockpit, the flight attendant pulled the cabin manager aside. "Who is she?" she whispered. The manager looked around, then leaned in. "Her name is Rose Carter. She's not just a first-class passenger. She's a major partner with our airline's biggest investor." "What?" the flight attendant asked, shocked. "She owns one of the most powerful companies in our region. She's the reason we even have the new first-class lounge in New York." The attendant's mouth dropped open. "She's the reason you still have this job," the manager added quietly. Back in her seat, Rose received a message on her phone. It was from her assistant. They called. "The airline CEO wants to talk. Should I arrange a meeting?" Rose typed back, "Not now. Let them wait." She looked out the window. The clouds floated peacefully below the plane, untouched by what was happening inside. Everyone had made a judgment about her the moment they saw her. But they didn't know her story. They didn't know the battles she had fought to sit in that seat. And they didn't know she had the power to move more than just people out of her way. She could move companies, investors, and entire industries with just one phone call. The flight was halfway to its destination. The clouds outside were still, but inside the plane, something had changed. People in first class weren't laughing loudly or calling the flight attendant for wine anymore. They were quiet. They kept stealing glances at Ms. Rose Carter, the woman in seat 1A. But not everyone had learned their lesson yet. The rude man from earlier, the one in the expensive suit and gold watch, still looked annoyed. He kept shaking his head and whispering to the other passengers. "She's just pretending," he said to the woman beside him. "There's no way someone like her has real power. Probably just a social media influencer or something." The woman nodded, but she didn't sound sure. Still, the staff looked scared. He scoffed. "Please, they're just trying not to get in trouble. Once we land, everything will go back to normal." Then he chuckled and said, loud enough for everyone nearby to hear, "I bet she borrowed that suit and ticket. Maybe even faked her identity." Rose heard everything. She didn't look up. She didn't say a word. She just opened her tablet and started reading some reports. Quiet, focused, calm. But that calm was more powerful than yelling. It made people uncomfortable, especially those who had already judged her. At the back of the cabin, 2 flight attendants whispered again. "She's too calm," one of them said. "That's what scares me." The other nodded. "Did you hear? After she made that one call, someone from head office called the captain directly." "What? Are you serious?" "Yes," the second attendant said. "And they said, 'Do not upset Ms. Carter again. Treat her like VIP.'" The first attendant's mouth dropped open. "Who is she?" "She's a CEO," the other replied. "Her company works with our airline, and not just business class ads. We're talking big money. She could shut down a whole sponsorship deal if she wanted to." Back in first class, the passengers started noticing something strange. One by one, the flight attendants began offering Rose special treatment, quietly, politely, and with full respect. "Would you like a hot towel, Miss Carter? Can I offer you anything else from the private menu? Please let us know if you need anything at all." The man in the gold watch watched it all. His face slowly changed. He was no longer smiling. Then came a surprise. A different flight attendant, not the ones from earlier, walked up to Rose. "Ma'am," she said kindly, "I've been asked to offer you the captain's private message. He sends his personal apologies for what happened earlier." Rose nodded slowly. "Tell him thank you." The other passengers were shocked. Apologies from the captain? Who gets that kind of respect? A little while later, the rude man stood up and walked toward the restroom. As he passed Rose's seat, he dropped his voice and said, "Don't get too comfortable. Money can't buy class." It was a mistake. Rose slowly turned to him and looked straight into his eyes for the first time. "Neither can a suit," she said softly. The man blinked, then quickly walked away. The woman beside Rose, who had been quiet the whole flight, let out a soft laugh. "That was smooth," she said. Rose gave a small smile. Sometimes silence is power, but sometimes words help too. In the sky, things looked normal. But inside that airplane, one powerful woman had flipped the balance of power without shouting, without fighting, without losing her dignity. And no one saw it coming. They laughed too soon. They judged too quickly. And now, they were realizing who they were really sitting next to. Meanwhile, in a tall office building far away, the airline CEO sat at his desk. His assistant walked in with a worried face. "Sir, we have a problem," she said. "What now?" he asked. "The Rose Carter incident. It's already spreading. Someone on the plane posted a photo of her. And now social media is talking." He sat up straight. "Get me her assistant. I want to talk to her. Now." But Rose Carter had already made up her mind. This wasn't just about a seat. This was about respect. And she wasn't going to let it go so easily. The flight continued, calm on the outside, but tense on the inside. Most of the passengers in first class were silent now. They avoided eye contact with Ms. Rose Carter, the quiet woman in seat 1A who had changed the mood of the entire cabin with just one phone call. People who had laughed before were now sitting still, watching, thinking, regretting. But Rose, She remained as calm as ever. No anger, no loud words, no revenge. Because she didn't need to raise her voice. She was used to this. Flashback. 5 years ago. 5 years earlier, Rose had entered a high-level business conference for the first time. She was one of only 3 black women in a room filled with over 200 business executives. When she walked in, no one came to greet her. No one offered her coffee. Some even thought she was one of the hotel workers. She sat down quietly. When it was her time to speak, a few people rolled their eyes. One man said under his breath, "Let's see how long she lasts." But when Rose opened her mouth, the entire room went quiet. She spoke with knowledge, confidence, and clarity. She didn't use big words to sound smart. She used truth. She talked numbers, plans, results, and she knew her business better than anyone else in the room. When she finished, the same people who ignored her lined up to shake her hand. Since then, Rose had made a promise to herself. "I will never raise my voice to be heard. I will build something so strong that the world will have no choice but to listen." Back on the plane, Rose sipped her water and checked her calendar on her tablet. Her schedule was full. Meetings, product launches, interviews, and a special dinner with international investors. But now her focus shifted. She opened an email thread titled, "Internal Partnership with SkyVista Airlines, Review and Contract Status." Yes, this was the same airline she was flying with. She smiled lightly. They had no idea just how much power she held. Meanwhile, in the cockpit, the pilot received a message through the internal system. Message from SkyVista CEO. "Do not upset Ms. Rose Carter. She is a valued VIP and executive-level partner. Keep everything smooth. If needed, offer any in-flight upgrade or apology necessary. Report back upon landing." The pilot looked at the message and raised his eyebrows. "Wow," he muttered. "So she's that Rose Carter." His co-pilot nodded. "She's the face behind True Glow Beauty, right?" "Yes, that brand made our airline millions last quarter alone." "Then the staff up front are probably sweating right now," the co-pilot said with a smirk. In first class, the mood changed again. People started whispering about her company. Someone had Googled her. One woman read the headline out loud softly. "Meet Rose Carter, the billion-dollar beauty mogul changing the game." The rude man from earlier had turned pale. He tried to look normal, but sweat formed on his forehead. He checked his phone under the table and read article after article. Rose Carter is one of the youngest self-made CEOs in the country. Known for her grace, silence, and unmatched business mind. Partner of SkyVista Airlines, the woman behind their luxury branding. He sank deeper into his seat. Rose received another message on her phone. "Assistant, SkyVista CEO has asked for a call tonight. They want to avoid public damage. Should I confirm?" She typed back, "No, let them wait. I'll call after the investors' dinner." She locked her phone and leaned back. The flight attendant walked over again, this time with a special dessert tray. "Ms. Carter," she said softly, "the kitchen prepared this just for you." Rose looked at the tray, then at the attendant. "Thank you. And, on behalf of the team, we're sorry. Truly." Rose gave a polite nod. It's not the first time. But it might be the last, for this airline. At least. The attendant stood frozen for a second. She understood what Rose meant. By the time the flight was preparing to land, the entire first-class cabin felt different. People sat straighter. They didn't whisper anymore. Even the rude man quietly gathered his things, avoiding Rose's eyes. He now knew exactly who she was, and he had insulted her in front of everyone. But Rose never asked for revenge. She didn't yell, didn't cry, didn't argue. Because she wasn't just a woman in a seat. She was a CEO. She was a builder. She was a storm in silence, and everyone was just now beginning to understand. The plane began its slow descent. Outside the window, the lights of the city sparkled like stars. Inside, there was silence. Not the usual tired silence of travelers, but a heavy, thoughtful silence, the kind that comes after people realize they've made a mistake. No one was laughing now. No one dared to whisper. Rose Carter, the quiet woman in seat 1A, had changed everything without raising her voice. She had walked onto the flight just like anyone else, alone, polite, and calm. But now, every person in first class knew she wasn't just anyone. She was power. She was calm strength. And most of all, she was watching. As the plane touched down, the wheels hit the ground with a soft thud. The seatbelt signs blinked on. People sat straighter, looked ahead, and tried to act normal. But things weren't normal anymore. People who had judged her, who thought she didn't belong, now struggled with their guilt. One woman on the aisle seat across from Rose slowly reached into her purse and took out a notebook. She flipped through pages filled with goals. Open business. Be confident. Speak up. She looked at Rose and thought, she didn't speak up, but she still changed everything. I want to be like that. The rude man in the gold watch fidgeted with his seatbelt. He hadn't said a word since he learned who she was. His earlier pride had turned into shame. His expensive clothes couldn't hide how small he now felt. He wanted to say sorry. He wanted to take back his words, but he didn't know how. Just before the plane reached the gate, an announcement came from the pilot. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to New York. Please remain seated while we taxi to the gate. We'd also like to extend a special thank you to Ms. Rose Carter for flying with us today. Everyone looked at her. Rose didn't flinch. She simply nodded and kept her face calm. But inside, she felt something. Not pride, not revenge. Peace. She didn't need the world to clap for her. She only needed the world to learn. As the plane came to a stop, the seatbelt sign turned off. People stood up, but no one rushed toward the exit. They waited. They watched Rose. The same passengers who had once whispered about her skin, her clothes, and her presence, now stepped aside to let her go first. She stood slowly, picked up her designer laptop bag, and adjusted her coat. As she walked past the rows of first class, heads turned. Some people gave small, respectful nods. Some looked down in shame. And some, like the young woman with the notebook, looked at her with wide eyes, filled with hope. At the jet bridge, a team of airline staff was already waiting. One of them held a sign with her name. Another had a cart with fresh flowers. "Miss Carter," said the woman in charge, "we are so sorry for what happened earlier. We want to make this right." Rose stopped, looked at them, and said gently, "It's not about flowers. It's about who you see and who you ignore." The staff nodded quietly. "We understand," one of them said. Rose gave a small smile. "I hope you do." Behind her, passengers exited slowly. Many of them kept glancing at her as they passed. The rude man stayed near the back, eyes down, lips tight. He didn't apologize. Not with words. But the way he avoided her eyes said enough. Outside the terminal, a black car waited. Rose stepped in, placed her bag beside her, and finally took a deep breath. Her assistant greeted her through the car screen. "Miss Carter, the SkyVista CEO is still requesting a call. Shall I set it up?" Rose looked out the window. Then she replied calmly, "Not yet. Let them sit with their silence, just like I did." As the car drove away from the airport, the city lights danced on the glass. Inside that quiet car sat a woman who didn't need to shout to be heard. A woman who had taught an entire plane full of people a lesson they'd never forget. Not with anger, not with threats, but with grace, patience, and power that didn't need permission. The next morning, Rose Carter sat in her hotel suite, dressed in a sharp black blazer and soft cream blouse. The city outside was still waking up, but she was already focused. Her phone buzzed. Assistant's message. "SkyVista CEO is waiting in the boardroom downstairs. Do you still want to go?" Rose stared at the message for a moment. Then she replied, "Yes. Let's begin." She stood, straightened her coat, and walked out without a second thought. The boardroom in the luxury hotel was large, filled with glass walls, city views, and polished wood. The CEO of SkyVista Airlines, a gray-haired man in a navy suit, stood up quickly when Rose entered. His hands were slightly shaking, his smile forced. "Miss Carter," he said, "thank you for coming. Please, sit." Rose sat slowly and looked at him without a smile. He spoke again, trying to sound confident. "I want to start by apologizing for what happened on your flight yesterday. That was unacceptable." She nodded once. "Yes, it was." He swallowed hard. "We didn't know it was you. I mean, of course, we treat all passengers with respect. But—" Rose raised a hand to stop him. "Respect shouldn't depend on who someone is. I was a black woman in seat 1A. That should have been enough to deserve kindness. I shouldn't have to be a CEO to matter." The CEO fell silent. She continued, "Let me ask you something. How many people like me do you have in your leadership team?" He paused, surprised. "You mean black women, or anyone from a background that doesn't fit your usual mold?" He hesitated. "I'd have to check the exact numbers." Rose interrupted again, calmly. "That's the problem. You have to check. If we don't exist in your rooms, we won't exist in your respect." A marketing executive entered the room quietly, holding a tablet. "We've tracked the social media mentions about yesterday's flight," she said, her voice nervous. "It's spreading fast." The CEO rubbed his forehead. "How bad?" She continued, "Passengers have posted about the way Ms. Carter was treated. Photos, videos, articles. One video already has 2.3 million views in 12 hours. The CEO looked at Rose with a worried face. "We'd like to avoid this becoming a bigger issue." Rose smiled slightly. Not angry, not proud, just knowing. "This is already a big issue," she said. "And it's not about me. It's about how many people fly every day and are treated as less." The CEO leaned forward. "We want to fix this. What can we do to make this right?" Rose paused for a moment. Then she spoke clearly. Not with gifts, not with press statements, but with action. She reached into her bag and pulled out a folder. "This is a diversity and equity proposal I had drafted 2 years ago. Your company passed on it back then. Today, you'll sign it." The CEO opened the folder, read a few lines, and his face changed. The proposal included mandatory diversity training for all staff, hiring audits for leadership roles, a new program supporting young black entrepreneurs in aviation and travel. "This is large," he said carefully. "This is fair," Rose replied. He looked at her, unsure. "And if we say no?" Rose leaned back and folded her arms. "Then the world will hear your answer, from me, and from the millions already watching." There was a long silence in the room. Finally, the CEO picked up the pen and signed. He didn't do it out of fear. He did it because, in that moment, he realized she wasn't just asking for justice for herself. She was creating something bigger, something that would help people who'd never get to sit in seat 1A, but deserve the same respect. As the meeting ended, Rose stood, shook no hands, and simply said, "Thank you for your time. I have a real meeting to attend now, with people who've always seen me." She walked out with quiet strength. Outside the boardroom, her assistant smiled. "Next stop?" she asked. Rose replied calmly, "The investor dinner." "But they already know who you are," her assistant said. Rose smiled gently. "Yes, but today, the world is learning." The sun had set. The city lights glowed softly as Rose Carter stepped out of the black car and walked into the Grand Hotel ballroom. She didn't rush. She didn't need to. Tonight wasn't about proving anything. Tonight was about being seen, truly seen, for who she was. Inside, the room was filled with powerful people. CEOs, investors, bankers, and world leaders in expensive suits and polished dresses. But all eyes turned when Rose entered. She didn't wear gold or glitter. She wore a simple black dress and carried herself like someone who knew her worth. People stood up. Some clapped. Others nodded with quiet respect. The same world that had once looked past her now paused just to watch her walk in. A well-known investor came over, smiling. "Rose Carter," he said, "we've been following the story. What you did on that flight was legendary." Rose shook his hand gently. "It wasn't legendary. It was necessary." He laughed nervously. "Still, I must say, the way you handled it. No shouting, no anger, just quiet power. It inspired a lot of us." "Good," Rose said. "Maybe now you'll start listening when people who don't look like you speak." She moved across the room, greeted by old friends and new allies. The energy had changed. This wasn't pity. This wasn't surprise. This was respect, pure and earned. At the center of the room, a large screen lit up. A woman from the event's organizing board stepped forward. "Tonight, we honor leaders who don't just sit at the table. They change the way the table works." She paused. "And one of those people is here tonight. A woman who faced bias 30,000 feet above the ground, and still rose above it." The screen showed clips from the flight. Silent photos of Rose seated calmly while others whispered, then clips of the apology meeting with SkyVista. The woman continued. She didn't fight back with anger. She changed the system with wisdom. "Please welcome Ms. Rose Carter." Applause filled the room. Rose stood, not surprised, not proud, just ready. She walked to the stage, slowly and strong. She stood at the podium and looked out. Then she said softly, "I didn't ask to be the face of a movement. I just asked to be treated like a person. But the truth is, if I have to stand up so others can sit safely in seat 1A tomorrow, then I will." Again and again. The room was silent. She continued, "Change doesn't come from shouting the loudest. It comes from showing up, even when the world tells you to disappear." To the people who looked at me on that flight and saw less, I forgive you, but I also challenge you. Look again. Look deeper, because the next black woman you ignore might not be a CEO. She might be someone with no power at all. And she deserves your respect just as much. There were tears in some eyes. Some stood. All clapped. She stepped down from the stage, not a celebrity, not a hero, just a woman who belonged. As the evening continued, her assistant whispered something in her ear. "SkyVista just announced your proposal went public. They're calling it the Rose Carter Reform." Rose chuckled softly. "I didn't ask for that." "I know," her assistant smiled. "That's why it matters." Later that night, alone in her room, Rose took off her heels, sat on the couch, and finally exhaled. She looked at her reflection in the glass. Not the city behind her, not the success, not the power. Just herself. A woman who had been doubted, mocked, judged, but who never stopped walking. Because she knew where she belonged. And now, the world did too.